Asked, why is it important, just in the context of Winunga Nimadja, why is it important to have a health service by Aboriginal people for Aboriginal people? Why can't Aboriginal people go to the mainstream health services? Or I hear, for example, why is it important to have an Aboriginal entrepreneurship leadership task force leading the way for other? Why can't they use the mainstream services or mainstream examples that we have? And I met a woman on Sunday. Was that yesterday? Yes, so yesterday, yeah, Mother's Day. It was a Mother's Day classic, and it was the Deadly Runners. Has anyone heard of the Deadly Runners? Yeah. So I met this woman who was one of the Deadly Runners, and it's this wonderful program where they take Indigenous people who have never run in their life, and they will slowly build up to doing a half marathon and head off over to New York to do the marathon over there. And I met a young woman whose name was Elsa, and she comes from Thursday Island, and she was really cold on Canberra on Sunday, really quite a different climate to Thursday Island. But she said when she first started doing the program on Thursday Island, she was morbidly obese, was how she described herself. And she decided to take part to try and change her own health outcomes. Now, Thursday Island is only a 5-kilometre track around, apparently. So when she was training, she'd go once around the island, and then she'd go again around the island, and then she'd go again until she was slowly building up to being able to do the half marathon. She lost 20 kilos in the first little while of doing it. And what happened after that was everybody else in the community started seeing what she was doing, and they started doing it as well. And so the health impacts from watching somebody in their own community doing so well had this wonderful knock-on effect, and that's the reason why you have to have Indigenous entrepreneurship leading the way, why you have to have Indigenous health advocates who are leading the way. And Jessa Rogers is also one of these people who is leading the way for others. She's an academic. I just love your story, Jessa. She started as a young mum, 16 years old when she got pregnant, and like I said earlier, anything that you do after that is a bloody miracle. But she's now the assistant professor at University of Canberra, and she's an educator and an artist and has quite a remarkable story to tell. So please make her welcome. This is Jessa Rogers.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. I'd like to thank Richie for his welcome to country, and also would like to offer my own respects to elders past, present and future, and acknowledge the country we're on, Ngunnawal country, which is actually the country of my birth and my conception, so I feel very connected to this place. My mum was raised in Cootamundra, which is not far from here, and I've recently moved back in the last couple of years to Canberra to find out more about what it means to be a Koori person after being raised in Queensland. So many things that have been brought up tonight have sparked a lot of my own story, but basically tonight I wanted to speak to you about the power of education for young Indigenous people, and particularly young Indigenous girls. And I'm really thankful that we've already covered the fact that the first part that needs to be understood is that Indigenous people, most of us live in cities, most of us have fair skin, and statistically most of us speak English as our first language. So the sort of old-fashioned idea that Aboriginal people only live in the desert and remote is just not true anymore. And the first part in understanding what our peoples need is looking at the reality of who we are and where we're going. We continue to change, our cultures continue to change like every civilization has. We evolve, our language changes, our behaviours change, and today you can see people like myself and Joshua here, young people who education is a part of our lives, are, I guess, testament to the power of education. A little bit of my story was, I was pregnant at school. I finished Year 12 with a 10-day-old baby. I hated being the Aboriginal girl that fell pregnant because I know that's what a lot of teachers expected. I was one of only a few Aboriginal kids in a regional Queensland town, which is, if you've seen the latest ad with a lot of white Australians in it, you'll understand what Queensland is like and was like when I grew up there. But I didn't let that stop me because I didn't want to be that person. I didn't want to live the way my family lived. And I was, I guess, the product of intergenerational trauma in some aspects. My mum is my Aboriginal parent. She was removed from her mother was removed from her mother. We met my birth grandmother when I was in grade 3, and she very soon passed away at 43 years old. So our family history, I grew up knowing I was Aboriginal, but not with my own family. And thankfully my mum connected us in the local community where we grew up on the Sunshine Coast, Gubbi Gubbi people. And I was very thankful for that. But I definitely understand some of those issues, and when I became a teacher I started working with Aboriginal girls in particular, and that really sparked the passion in me for Indigenous education, and especially around what was missing, because even though our curriculum has become more centralised and we have the Australian curriculum, teachers still struggle to teach about Aboriginal history because they don't even know it themselves. So how can they teach about it? And it's still sort of seen as on the outskirts of what's important and why do we need to teach that. And I watch Indigenous kids go through school and think, this isn't for me, I don't see myself in the curriculum. And I guess that's what led to my passion for higher education. And I went through university, I did a master's, and then I did a PhD at ANU looking at the experiences of Aboriginal girls that are attending boarding schools. And so when Joshua was speaking about people having to leave their communities, that's what I look at, the stories of the girls that have to leave their own communities to go away for school, to boarding schools. And amazingly, well not really, a lot of the kids come from Walgett, come from Bourke. In fact, one of the most amazing Aboriginal educators I came across in one of the private boarding schools in Sydney was a very proud Aboriginal woman from Bourke, just finished her education degree. She's going to be an amazing teacher. So those communities, although they do have very racist past, are producing some really amazing Aboriginal young people who are using education as a vehicle for change. I had a few points, I guess, that I wanted to make. And the first one was, I know Joe touched on it, but also Auntie Jean, about the day of mourning. So I'm very lucky to be a young Indigenous person, the youngest Aboriginal person on the National NAIDOC Committee. And from 1940 to 1955, we had the day of mourning, and then it sort of transformed into not just a day of protest, but a week of celebrations. And that's what NAIDOC Week is. So I'm very, very happy and excited to be alongside other Aboriginal leaders. But I totally agree with the point that Jack's made, and it's so frustrating for us as young people to see that decisions keep being made by white people, and Indigenous money, or money that people say is going towards Indigenous causes and so forth, end up in white hands. I saw recently there's a new Indigenous research fund, and I wondered how many Indigenous people are going to see any of that money, and how many Indigenous people are going to be leading that research. Probably not that many. The little catchphrase that sort of goes around and has been used, and I guess in protest, is nothing about us without us. And I think that still rings true for Aboriginal people, but more recently, somebody that I met on Twitter, and I also connected to Richie on Twitter, so it's always nice to put a face to a Twitter account. But Summer May Finlay actually spoke at a health gathering the other week, and she said, as a young Aboriginal woman, I'm actually not content now for nothing about us without us. It's no longer acceptable for them to just say we consulted with 1 or 2 Aboriginal people and we know what we're doing. It's actually got to be nothing about us that's not led by us. And I think across education, across policy, in those spaces, people need to make way for Indigenous voices to be leading, not just apprenticeships or traineeships, and we've got a few Indigenous staff, we're meeting our quotas. It's actually investment in Indigenous leadership. And I work in university at the moment, and you will see across the nation that universities are appointing Indigenous PVCs and CVCs and Indigenous leaders in sort of figurehead positions to sort of encourage the direction of Indigenous strategy and community engagement and things like that. I would like to see that in government. I totally agree there should be a young Indigenous voice on the Indigenous Advisory Committee for the Prime Minister. And across all levels of government, if there's no young Indigenous person on those committees, on those panels, on those boards, there needs to be questions why, because there's plenty of us that are educated, passionate, will work for free as much as we can, and it's no longer, oh, we don't know anybody or we can't find somebody. It's actually you haven't been looking hard enough. because there are people out there that are looking for those opportunities to share their knowledge. So in closing, I guess I really do want to say that there is a lot of good stories out there. There is a lot of Indigenous success and things are happening in schools particularly. Our young people are growing up with access to a cultural curriculum in some forms. It does change from directorate to directorate, but it is happening. And for those of us who are a little bit older and no longer in school and universities, I guess I leave you with the message, what can you do in your own life to make space for an Indigenous leader? So if you're taking up a position or you have access to push people forward as we do, and I know a lot of people mentor young people and so forth, what can you take away from this and say, how can I help somebody that's an Indigenous person have a voice in the space that I work in? Thank you very much for the chance to talk tonight.
Wonderful speech. I overheard you earlier saying that you were a bit nervous and you didn't think yourself a very good public speaker, but I think you proved yourself wrong there. Thank you.